have a fun. The conversation.
Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Adam.
Adam, you're my bad news bitch.
I'm so honored to be that for you, Hyle.
You have a role. Isn't that great? Everybody needs their own niche. Everybody needs a place on this podcast. And you have somehow been slotted in as doing the episodes that the other co-hosts don't want to do because they're complete bummers.
It almost makes me look a bit masochistic in that regard. I'll do the episode, Hyle. Pick me.
Either masochistic, like you enjoy the pain because it brings you pleasure, or it makes you look like a sociopath because you don't care enough and you're willing to indulge for a couple of hours about stuff that just sucks and there's no silver lining whatsoever. But all right, let me get into it, because when this episode goes live, we're only going to be days away from Donkey Kong Bonanza's release, which, of course, happy days. Am I right? The greater Donkey Kong universe and even Rare fandom is filled with this sense of positivity and happiness, at least as it relates to our hobby and not the greater world around us, than it has been for ages. And it's mostly because we have a big new 3D Donkey Kong game on the very immediate horizon, practically over our heads. It doesn't get any better than that. I would say, above all else, a new standalone Donkey Kong game is generally the highest of highs. And
honestly, it's just kind of insane in general that it's already been 3.5 months since its reveal. That's like, woo! Feels like we had barely any time and too much time to talk about it.
Yeah, we haven't had any time really to indulge too much in it. It's still better than Diddy Kong Racing's hype cycle was back in the day, which was like a month and a half. But, you know, even though we have all of this giddiness about the diddiness of it all coming out, it still feels like the extended DKU can't catch a damn break, because whenever something goes well for one side, things seem to start to fall apart for the other side. In 2014, immediately after the release of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, the last new standalone Donkey Kong game, Rare suffered mass layoffs, the likes of which they had never seen up until that point. And it was a very bleak time to be a Rare fan, even though, you know, hey, a new Donkey Kong game just came out a couple months beforehand. David Wise did the soundtrack for it. That's great. But it really felt like the future of Rare was thrown into question. And then, as Donkey Kong entered its long years in the wilderness, spinning its wheels at vicarious visions, Rare suddenly rebounded with a new direction and energy and focus they hadn't seen in years, leading to their biggest game of all time. While those who were unfairly laid off formed Platonic Games as a sort of independent offshoot, at least of the Rare spirit. So, while Donkey Kong was just completely dried up, all of a sudden we had the Rare Renaissance and Sea of Thieves and Ukulele and all of this excitement and energy and renewed optimism on that side of the fence. And now that Donkey Kong is back yet again, Platonic and Rare have both suffered layoffs, practically one after the other. And the Rare layoffs are what we are discussing on this episode. As promised, we were going to do this episode before Bonanza's release. And, you know, the Rare layoffs are just... it's resulted in the cancellation of Everwild, which we have discussed, of course, on the Kongversation whenever there is anything worthy to discuss. So twice. We've done 2 Everwild-focused episodes of the Kongversation. And we already covered the situation at Platonic couple weeks back. And, you know, that episode, we did it live because it was part of our Stinky Ape summer coverage, because it coincided practically with the release of the Yuka Replay Lead demo. And so that was our Platonic installment of Stinky Ape Summer. And besides that, though, there wasn't as much fanfare behind that episode. I didn't even monetize it on YouTube because it felt icky to kind of try to cash in on people's misfortune who I respect and admire and I'm a fan of, and I'm just like, I'm not going to do that. And so same thing this time around. No monetization, no DK Vine, Patreon, or t-shirt plugs. We're just going to kind of do this buttoned up with a dour face. I don't want to see any smiles from you, Adam. And anybody listening to this, you better not smile once. Bite your cheeks, because we are talking serious business. We're going to discuss what happened at Rare and Xbox Studios and Microsoft on July 2nd, with a company-wide culling of roughly 9,100 jobs across various departments, including Xbox Game Studios and its various subsidiaries. And, man, fuck this. I am not going to sugarcoat this. I'm not going to say, well, look on the bright side. It could have been worse. And it could have been worse for Rare. I think Rare actually came out of this better than a lot of studios. And whether or not you want to say Everwild painted a convenient target on their backs, it, at the very least, was a concentrated target that didn't leave the entire studio in disarray.
You know what? I would actually tend to agree with you, Hyle, because, like, make no mistake about it. What happened sucks. This shouldn't have happened. And, you know, obviously we'll get into a lot of this way more in depth in just a minute. But, like, obviously there's still a lot to blame Phil Spencer for, and we'll get to there. But I do also want to say that, like, what's currently happening at Microsoft right now, not just Xbox in general, but Microsoft as a whole company, it kind of goes beyond Phil Spencer and more to the nitty gritty of the higher ups in just the company of Microsoft,
yes,
the tech conglomerate.
Yes, and it's a problem across most of the industry right now. Like video games, tech, it's an epidemic, it's a plague, and we're not absolving anybody on this episode. Like, I've got lots of criticisms towards what Phil Spencer has been up to, but I think too often we look for scapegoats, we look for villains, and Phil Spencer is closer to a known quantity for gamers, and he makes an easier villain than some of the people above him. And I like I said, lots of criticisms about how Phil Spencer has handled Xbox over the last half decade plus, but it goes beyond him as well. There are lots of people we can wag our fingers at in impotent fashion. But Rare in general has been spared from previous brutal slash and burns across Xbox Studios. And it's mostly been thanks to their success since 2018. Sea of Thieves whether you love it or hate it, and I know our audience is kind of mixed on it, there are people who tune in who have no interest about Sea of Thieves. It just doesn't strike any chord with them. And there are other people who are absolutely mad about it. And I understand that. It's not the traditional type of Rare game that the more Nintendo-oriented audience would have fallen in love with. But Sea of Thieves is a complete success by all metrics, and it has given Rare, I think, a safety net that has allowed them to weather a lot of these just ruthless make number go up on our sheets, we got to eliminate all these jobs, just absolute slaughterfest. And you know, I mentioned Everwild on our Stinky Ape Summer episodes when we talked about the Xbox Showcase. Mentioned it a couple times, actually. And, you know, I said, if Everwild's not seen during this Xbox Showcase, if it's still nowhere ready to be shown off, cancel it. Like, you've got to cut your losses. At this point, the game has been in development for over a decade, and we're going to get into the history of Everwild a bit on this episode and where it all went wrong. But my thinking at the time, and I didn't want to say it, but my thinking at the time was, this is going to put a target on the Everwild team's back if they're not reassimilated into other areas, other projects at Rare as soon as possible. This has been going on too long. There's nothing to show for it. And at this point, it's only going to lead to heartbreak. And I absolutely loathe how right I was. But not just how right I was, because I think anybody could have seen this coming, but just how quickly it transpired after the Xbox Showcase. And, you know, there had been rumors that there was going to be a mass firing across Microsoft the week it happened. So we were kind of bracing for it. But at the same time, you know, talking with some people, there wasn't necessarily a sense that Rare was in any danger, or at the very least, they didn't feel like they would be in any danger. And indeed, like, most of the studio was spared. It was the Everwild team, specifically the senior leadership, that got laid off. And of course, it's a bigger story because Everwild was canceled.
Yeah, I definitely think that if not for the success that Sea of Thieves has experienced since its, like, 1-year anniversary relaunch and its recent success, essentially being released onto PS5 about, you know, a year and a half ago, I would say things would have been, like, probably much worse for Rare at this point. We could have maybe even seen bigger layoffs happen at Rare even before this if Sea of Thieves had not been kind of floating the studio for a while.
Yeah.
And obviously we'll get into it with some of the other non-Rare Xbox studios, but, like, as of today, you know, we're recording this on a Sunday evening, July 13th, 5:26 p.m. Mountain Time. But, like, Rare pretty much got off a lot easier than, like, every single other Xbox studio out there.
Yeah.
And it does very much feel like it is mostly Sea of Thieves to thank for kind of protecting them and the continued success of that game.
Yeah. Yeah, so, like, whatever you think about Sea of Thieves has turned out to be a lifeline for Rare during a very scary time in the video game industry. And, of course, Rare is celebrating their 40th anniversary this year. It's absolutely sucks that this is happening and that they're losing a lot of familiar figures that are so associated with the studio, particularly from their fans, when they're about to roll out these 40th anniversary celebrations. I don't even know how they're going to do this you know, given that this is what everybody's talking about vis-a-vis, you know, the studio and their enduring legacy at the moment. It's not like they can't and won't rebound from this, but it's just the timing of it all. My God. But yeah, like, I think that, and we'll get into all of that as well, and like what the future of Rare might look like under these very fraught circumstances with Xbox and Microsoft. But where did it go wrong with Everwild? Oh my God. So Everwild, again, it's not a topic we brought up too often on the conversation. Mostly, hey, do you think we'll see more about Everwild at this Xbox showcase? Oh, we didn't hear anything about Everwild. Okay, maybe next year. And that's been pretty much the case. But Everwild has had a tumultuous development history. It's been, I think, the biggest public failure that Rare has ever had. And when I say this, this isn't me chastising anybody who worked on Everwild. I think sometimes projects just fail to click. Sometimes things just don't work out. Where it went wrong with Everwild is they announced it. They made the mistake of announcing something that was in no way ready to be announced. It had no ETA, and they were trying to generate hype for it and further hype for the studio, riding on that wave of success from Sea of Thieves. And the problem is there really wasn't anything to go off of for these two trailers. I mean, yes, some people were intrigued. Some people became, you know, Everwild fans just based on these two trailers. But by and large, I know, like, I'm, you know, the Rare fanatic, the Rare, the Rare devotee who will lap up basically anything that the studio puts out for me at least once. And even I was just kind of like, it's really hard to maintain an interest in Everwild when I still don't know what Everwild actually is. And, you know, had they been able to ride the momentum of the first trailer, sure. But the difference was, you know, when they announced Sea of Thieves at E3 2015, basically you knew what the game was from that first trailer. It communicated to you what to expect. And that held true from that first trailer to release, basically. And Everwild, it was just a trailer of vibes, of these hooded figures communing with nature and all these made-up animals like Bloom Deer and something. I don't know. Looks cool, but I don't really know what it's going to be about.
Yeah, I will say, for as interested as I was in Everwild, and like, I don't think anyone here, you know, wanted the game to be canceled. Obviously, that was never a thing that should have happened. It would have been great to see this game be made and come out and also be successful for the studio, but I think the core failing of Everwild kind of comes from the fact that as cool it is as it is to kind of create a game and kind of sell it on its vibes, you definitely need more than just vibes when pitching a game, because it very much feels like they had the vibes, but they didn't know what to do with the game itself.
Yeah. And like I said, this is Rare's biggest high-profile failing in this regard of announcing a game and it never coming out. Like, the only instance that this has happened, at least since Rare became Rare from Ultimate Play the game, is Donkey Kong Racing, you know, and there were mitigating circumstances for that with the buyout. And everybody kind of understood why we weren't going to get Donkey Kong Racing. And it became Saberman Stampede behind the scenes. Anybody in the know knew it was Saberman Stampede, but Rare never announced it and said, hey, we're making Saberman Stampede. Here's a trailer. This is the first time they kind of stepped out and failed to deliver, which I think is remarkable given, how long they've been able to keep that streak alive. But for those who aren't aware, Everwild was first announced at the X019 event.
It was essentially their updated version of Xbox Fan Fest that they were doing in like the mid 2010s.
Yes, it was November 2019 that it was announced, and we knew, Rare was working on something else. Just personally speaking, when I got to visit Rare in 2016, there was the one floor of the one barn we were not allowed to go to. They kept us shut out, and specifically, Louise O'Connor was holed up in there with her team. And, we were like, ooh, what are you working on? It was like, we're not going to tell you. You're only here for Sea of Thieves. And come to find out, it had actually been in development in some form since 2014, around the exact same time Sea of Thieves was conceived, when Rare kind of dusted themselves off and started down the path they went on to kind of find this newfound success at long last on the Xbox platform. And Sea of Thieves had a very quick turnaround, in fact. Sea of Thieves was something that entered development in 2014, but then announced, again, at E3 2015, and then officially launched in March 2018, after that long, technical alpha phase where, they were continually to develop the game, but then they were able to have a build of it to take to things like E3 and Comic-Con and stuff like that. And then eventually, we got their version of the closed beta, the technical alpha, that people got to play before the retail release. But that became Rare's biggest by-the-number success story to date, with over 40 million players. Now, Everwild, on the other hand, as you said, it was a game basically about vibes, but it didn't really have anything else going for it. Now, we still don't really know what Everwild was going to entail, but they struggled to find any particular direction, purpose, or gameplay hook that was deemed compelling. And over the years, it has been attached to several names at Rare. Harry Robinson, who would actually leave Rare before the game was even announced and went to Playtonic for a time. Louise O'Connor took over the project, and Simon Woodruff became Everwild's design director for a time. And then, after it was announced, it briefly resurfaced some 7 months later. It was the Everwild Eternals trailer, was how they marketed it, shown during the Xbox Game Showcase at that year's, well, it wasn't actually an E3, it was the kind of gap year between the last in-person E3 and the last E3 that was digital only. But it was at the June 2020 Xbox Showcase, and it was the last time the public was given any glimpse of Everwild for the remaining 5 years of development. And then that October, Simon Woodruff resigned from Rare. June 2021, it was reported that Greg Mayles was being brought on to help give the project direction, because it was completely aimless at that point. And, Greg Mayles, we don't need to tell you who Greg Mayles is. Greg Mayles, probably the most legendary design mind at Rare, gave us the first 2 Donkey Kong Country games, Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, Grab by the Ghoulies, Viva Pinata, Nuts and Bolts, worked on the Kinect sports games, but of course helped really lay the foundations for the early Sea of Thieves. And, bring Greg Mayles, in case of emergency, break glass here, pull out Greg Mayles, it made sense. So when Greg Mayles was brought on, they reported that it had a new targeted release for 2024. So basically 3 years to make good. Then that November, Gary Napper joined Rare to become Everwild's new design director, the job Simon Woodruff had. And I believe somewhere after that, Greg Mails stepped aside again. I was like, all right, you've got it from here. I'm going to go do other stuff later. But then as the years went by, Everwild still had no workable gameplay mechanic that was deemed sufficient.
It's definitely difficult because when the news broke in, like, I feel like there were rumblings in like late 2020 that, hey, Everwild, I think it was when Simon left, there were rumblings like, hey, Everwild's not doing well. And then, that sort of got a discussion talking like, well, how can that be? They just showed off the game. It must be fine. Only then to find out months later in 2021, like early, like March maybe, It was like, no, the game's being retooled. Greg Mails is coming in to try and fix things. And so we don't, like, they want to release within, 2024, which, feasible enough. But at the same time, it is one of those things where, when you reboot, it probably didn't get, like, a hard reboot. They probably were able to keep, like, lots of stuff that they had developed still, but obviously if you're changing like the main core of the game that wasn't working, it's still going to take a while to make. So it makes sense that it'd be like, yeah, give yourself a while to figure it out. But I feel like, if you miss 3 presentations in a row for like Xbox, for like an Xbox game showcase, I think that's definitely something to be worried about at that point, because that would be 2024,
Yeah.
That's the targeted release date that you have, and you miss showing the game when it should be at least 3 years into its redevelopment. Like, there's something going on there still. It's like, where is this game? Where's the progress after 3 years of going silent, And of course, this year it also failed to show. So it's like we've gone 4 whole years after you had already rebooted a game that maybe didn't have a big team when it started back in 2014, but all the more same had essentially been in development for about half a decade before it was restarted.
Yeah.
And, the biggest fear about these games that always take so long to make is that as much as we want them to come out and be a success, the longer and longer they stay in development and have nothing to show for it, that's a lot of resources being diverted from the studio into that one project constantly, and in a sense that can start to maybe hold up potential other projects, because this team is still trying to work out how to fix this game, and they need more people for that reason.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing I can probably compare this game to is Skull and Bones. And, I'm sure.
Oh, no.
Unfortunately, I do have to go there, Hyle. Hyle knows this. For people who don't know, Skull and Bones is a pirate video game by Ubisoft that was essentially had a similar fate as Everwild, except it was also essentially started in about the same year, 2014, with the release of Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. The team at Ubisoft Singapore, I think, they had already seen a lot of feedback from previews and reviews ahead of time that people really like the sailing in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, and that there should be a whole game based around that. And so, essentially, immediately after they finished development on Black Flag, the goal was to create a pirate game with that engine that could essentially be used to make a whole new game about pirates. And in this about decade of development, the idea of what Skull and Bones was switched so many different hands. From this is going to be Ubisoft, a big Ubisoft MMO where people can be pirates and sail and have pirate adventures, to this is going to be a very budget-friendly, digital-only multiplayer game where you participate in ship battles, to it's going to be that, but we're also going to have an expansive story mode where you can still go on pirate adventures. And unfortunately, this game that it finally released last year in February of 2024, and it was just a completely different game from when it had started development, when they had even shown it like 2 years before, even its initial reveal back in like 2017, maybe. Mm-hmm. Like it had just changed so many times. This game had to have gone through like maybe 5 or 6 restarts completely.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, when that happens. The thing about it, though, was that unlike Rare, where Everwild finally got canceled, Ubisoft was not legally allowed to cancel this game because they had gotten a funding grant from the Singaporean government. So if they were to have canceled this game, they would have been in big legal disaster, bigger than the company itself is already in.
Yeah. And Skull and Bones kind of became a running joke, just given the thematic similarities to Sea of Thieves, which it was kind of parallel to. Of course, Sea of Thieves made it out and kind of set a template and set a fandom, and then here's Skull and Bones. But I remember like being at E3 and seeing like I think it was E3 2018. I forget which one. After one of the reboots, they had a trailer, and I was like, you know what? It's doing a different thing from Sea of Thieves, so I'm okay. It looks cool for what it's doing, but looking cool is different from actually, how it plays and how it feels. And I do know it kind of failed to set the world on fire when it came out. And I mean, I can't speak from personal experience because I haven't played it, but at least it came out. At least they did get it out eventually. Of course, they had to. But, it is, with Everwild, a case of just continually pumping money into something, hoping it will eventually pay off. Well, we spent so many years working on Everwild, we can't give up now. Because then those years will just be wasted. Hyle, that money will be wasted. Yes.
So, Hyle, I did some number crunching before we started this podcast, and I have some statistics here. So, from the time that Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag released, which was October 29th, 2013, that's its solid release date, to the release of Skull and Bones, which is February 16th, 2024, that was 3,762 days of that game being in active development.
You're not going to start singing a song from Rent, are you?
Yeah, you could maybe like add or subtract depending on when it exactly started. But that is about the general thing. Now, you compare that to Everwild, and we don't know when exactly the development on Everwild started. We know it was probably mid-2014. So let's be fair and say it maybe started on like mid to late June, like June 20th, 2014. This is when they got the green light. This is when they started incubating the project with maybe 3 people, right?
Yeah, so I know it started with, like, it didn't start, hey, we're going to make a game. It started with this incubation team, and they eventually hit upon this project that then started to develop and grow into its own thing. So yeah, it wasn't like, okay, well, we need to come up with a game. All right, it's Everwild. Let's just make that. So like its actual origins are a little bit more nebulous, but it would have been, just for simplicity's sake, around mid 2014, late 2014.
Yeah, let's say just mid 2014, like June 20th. All the way up to the day of the Xbox layoffs at Microsoft, which was like July 2nd, 2025. That means that the amount of time Everwild was being incubated to work on is about 4,030 days. And you compare that to one more thing, which is the release of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, February 13th, 2014, to the release date of Donkey Kong Bonanza in 4 days, July 17th, 2025. That wait, which so far has been one of the longest periods of hiatus for the DKU, not counting Banjo games, that is 4,172 days. So the time between getting a new Donkey Kong game and Everwild being canceled, that's roughly less than 150 days between both of those games.
Yeah. And,
that's insane.
Bonanza, of course, between Tropical Freeze and Bonanza, there was a whole Donkey Kong game that did start early development and then was scrapped. But yeah, like the turnaround time on that, and yet Everwild still had nothing workable, to the point where all that work, all that time, all that money, all that manpower, just in thin air. It's like there are a lot of factors, and there are a lot of people we can blame for this, and I don't even really want to do that, but I think it was a failing and a failure across multiple parties that it was allowed to go on this long. And look, I mean, the future of Everwild was already in question before the early July layoffs happened, because Rare did see a management change in October of last year. Studio head Craig Duncan was promoted to a leadership role at Xbox Game Studios, and Joe Neate and Jim Horth took over at Rare, the day-to-day at Rare. And so, with new management, that also comes a new direction, maybe a new philosophy. And, Everwild has still notionally been in development since they took over. But I know Rare has other fires going on right now. It hasn't just been Sea of Thieves and Everwild. And I know, like, the new management at Rare wants to do other things. And I think, I can't say. This is all speculation. So take this, at face value. This is just an observer observing. But I would imagine that part of the hesitation towards new management, we're not touching Everwild yet, is how that would look. We don't want to upset any apple carts. We don't want to hurt anybody. We're going to leave Everwild as is. Maybe they can find a workable direction in the next few months. Whatever, we don't want to be the bad new bosses coming in.
Yeah, you don't want to just like get in there and just be like, just fling the hammer down, just be like, no more Everwild. Sorry, you guys got to find other jobs. Maybe we'll transfer a couple of you onto some different projects. Just with like not having like a game plan, because obviously still the thing is, despite the fact that the longer Everwild is in development, the more resources the more resources and attention have to be put towards it than other projects, there's still that thing of how do you save some aspects of canceling a game? Like, where does that team go? Do you have to lay them off? Can you transfer them to a different team? Can you temporarily put them onto a new project to work on? Like, that's why these things don't immediately happen, because it's like, well, what is the fallout of this? You don't want to just blatantly slam and close this door when, we've talked about this on Platonic. There are so many people's lives and careers at stake for this,
For sure.
It's not something to pull the plug on lightly. And, I do think the worst part about the cancellation of Everwild does come from the fact that it did have to result in people being laid off and not being able to work at Rare anymore, instead of just being moved on to maybe Sea of Thieves support for temporarily, or being moved on to one of the other secret projects that they've been working on, maybe a smaller scope game, and that's a rough thing to happen.
I'm hopelessly naive. I'm bad at business, so I'm probably not the person to listen to when it comes to this kind of thing. But I would also argue that given how flush with cash Microsoft actually is, none of these layoffs were necessary, including the Everwild team. Maybe they failed to deliver, but they have roles. They can have roles elsewhere. Just because this project didn't come to fruition, they should have been reassigned ages ago. And I kind of furrow my brow at any suggestion that any of these people needed to be laid off. But again, I'm never going to have the corner office, so what do I know? I'm a clown with a Donkey Kong podcast.
Obviously, it does feel like something should have been done about Everwild when, like I said, if you were rebooted in like 2021 and you miss 2 E3s in a row, you miss both E3 2020. You missed that E3. You missed E3 2022.
We've missed all those E3s because E3 stopped existing after 2021.
Oh, okay. Let me rephrase this. You miss the Xbox presentation for 2021, and then you miss it 2 more years. I think 2023 is when you have to do that reevaluation.
Yeah.
And, some credit where credit is due. The fact that, Xbox leadership like Phil Spencer and even like Craig Duncan still somewhat believed that Everwild could turn into something really big and allow them to keep developing the game. That is something to, respect. Well, but at the same time, if you are already like 2 years into development on rebooting this project and you still don't have anything to show, I feel like that's the time where you have your all hands meeting and say, you guys have to choose something for this game.
I would say, and I've spoken highly of Craig Duncan in the past, and I still think he did a remarkable job of turning Rare around. From where it was at, it was a studio that really did have its future in question 11 years ago. I question whether Craig Duncan was too close to this because, he was promoted above Rare, still notionally in charge. And I'm wondering, is Everwild too much of a project he believed in, even though the results weren't there? Phil Spencer, he should have stepped in at some point and be like, what the hell is happening here? I think it's admirable in a way, hands-off leadership, let the creatives work. But at a certain point, you cross this barrier where you're like, we're not going anywhere with this. we need to turn around now because we're about to go off the track. We're about to go crashing into the ravine. And that's exactly what happened. At some point, somebody should have stepped in and said, why isn't this working? What do we need to do differently? And they've done that a couple times, but it still didn't yield any results. It still didn't produce anything tangible. So I think some hard questions needed to be asked far sooner than what happened earlier this month. And
I would even argue in a sense that this isn't even just sort of like a partial failing, like on Rare either, but like kind of an Xbox thing in general. Because one of the biggest criticisms at Xbox has always sort of been that the Xbox Game Studios brand has always sort of failed to really have a strong direction with their games, you know? It always seems like there are always a large handful of games from Xbox Game Studios that will be announced, they'll get gassed up, and then they will just get canceled or fall off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. One of the things that I remember the most, or, you know, they take way too long. Like, I understand that nowadays game development is about 4 to 5 years, you know, almost nearly half a decade to make one game. And that's a lot, you know, lots of money, lots of people, lots of time spent doing that. But at the same time, it almost feels like with Xbox Game Studios, it's a longer development time for some of these games, where they go beyond 4 or 5 years and they start going into 7 to 9 years. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, for the longest time at the start of the Xbox One era, you had that promise of, we're getting a brand new Crackdown game because Xbox fans love Crackdown and we want to deliver on that. And Crackdown 3 came out in like, when did Crackdown 3 come out? Like 2017? It came out like nearly 6 years after they announced it.
I don't even know what Crackdown is.
It was definitely Crackdown, but it seemed very basic, and it also seemed like this game didn't need to take nearly 6 years to come out, you know? This game feels like it should have taken only like 3 to 4 years to come out. Another thing that they've always been bad with, do you remember when they were revealing the Xbox One and making so many promises about games? And one of the big reveals was that there was an original Xbox game called Phantom Dust that sort of had a cult following. And the idea was, we are going to make a new Phantom Dust game. And people are going to love it. We've got this brand new talented studio that's making it. And here's a little sneak peek of it. And that little sneak peek was maybe 45 seconds, maybe a minute long CG teaser trailer that sort of didn't tell you anything about the game or the gameplay or the story. It was just showing you, hey, Phantom Dust is back. Get excited. Only to then find out, like, years later that that CG trailer had been made without the permission of the developers who are actually working on that new game. Not only that, but the game had essentially already been canceled by the time they revealed that CG trailer. Like, and Xbox and Microsoft never really said anything publicly about the cancellation of that game until years later. Where they're just like, yeah, it just didn't work out.
I mean, it's called Phantom Dust. What do you expect?
And, like, I will say, a little bit after they had finally publicly talked about, like, the cancellation of that game, I think they put, like, a remaster or, like, a backwards compatible version of the original Phantom Dust on Xbox One. And it's a neat game. I think it's kind of cool, but the idea, there was such a disconnect, and like not a lot of they weren't really being crystal clear about why it was canceled or why they had canceled it or never talked about it. They just sort of did and hoped people would forget, essentially. And that seems like a constant problem with Xbox game studios in general. There's this kind of fail.
Yeah, there's this idea among, I think, older Rare fans who like bore witness to the buyout era. You know, the aughts, effectively 2002 to, well, we'll just say charitably up to Sea of Thieves or Rare Replay. You know, like Rare during that time when they're still trying to find their footing on Xbox, and there was a lot of criticism and belief that Microsoft was holding them back, or Microsoft Game Studios, as it was known then before it became Xbox Game Studios, was holding Rare back and, you know, being too micromanagey, when in fact it's the opposite, really. They're very hands-off, sometimes to the detriment of the products, and sometimes it works well when that vision is already there and everything is just, you know, working out well, and the vision is coming together, and you've got something like Sea of Thieves, and then in other cases you've got Everwild, which is allowed to linger and languish for 11 years in some form or fashion without any tangible results. And at that point, yeah, like maybe you need a firmer hand, not to cancel or not to lay people off, but to say, hey, you know what? We need to try something else with this. And here's what we're going to do. But it feels like nobody really knows how to do that at Xbox Game Studios. I don't know. Like, again, I'm just an outside observer, but it seems like it's not just like these isolated incidents, but it's more often than not the norm, or it's happening way more than it happens elsewhere. At least they make these big public announcements of these projects, and then they just, you know, pull the rug out.
I want to give one more brief example with Xbox Game Studios. So back during the Xbox Showcase 2020, which, you know, at this point was about 5 years ago, they revealed a game for the Xbox Showcase 2020 called Contraband. And it was a very short teaser trailer. Again, all cinematic. They didn't tell you anything about what the story of the game was. They didn't tell you really anything about the gameplay, even. Maybe aside from a brief blurb, like, on the Xbox website after the presentation. But essentially what Contraband is/was when they announced it in 2020 is basically a multiplayer essentially like a multiplayer heist game. And that's about all they had to share of it. That was 5 years ago, and they have never once talked about Contraband since then. This game has not been re-revealed or really talked about any more than that initial reveal in 2020. And it's been 5 years.
I mean, to be fair...
Where is this game?
To be fair, there should be no legal way to buy Contraband. Otherwise, it would be false advertising.
Like, yeah, is this game still real? Is it still being made? Have they restarted development on it? Like... Again, you could say, oh, this might be a problem with the studio, but, like, it's still Xbox Game Studios, you know?
Yeah.
This is still, like, the wheelhouse of Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, Sarah Bond. It's like, what is going on with these games where they are being revealed and not coming out? Not only are they not coming out, but you just completely stop talking about them. Like, what is happening here? You know, you can say in interviews, yeah, these games are coming along great. I just visited this studio last week and played a new build of the game, you know, kind of like how Phil Spencer was doing last year with Everwild. You know, he had some interviews where he said, I just went to Rare and played a new build of Everwild. It's going great. The team's fantastic.
I mean, Phil Spencer never once in interviews says, "Oh God, what a train wreck. We really need to rein it in."
Oh my gosh. I went to Rare last week and played Everwild. What a disaster. No, of course you're going to, try to spin it with good news, but at the same time, like, you can still be positive, but also downplay. You don't have to be like, oh yeah, it's going great. The new build's fantastic. You can just be like, yeah, they're making progress, I guess. Obviously, what I'm trying to say is there's better ways than to go in guns blazing, just completely gassing up a project that is still struggling.
Yeah, it's poor leadership, but it's also poor brand management. Because, like, you're right. Like, how many projects get announced at these Xbox showcases and their XO events or whatever the fuck they're called? Or is it just X? Like, I don't know. They don't do them anymore, do they?
So the XO19, I think, was like one of the last times they did like like an Xbox type fan event. The most of the times it's just called the Xbox Showcase nowadays. Okay.
I guess it was
that's
XO.
Essentially their E3.
It was XO19 because it was 2019. It wasn't like Hugs and Kisses 19. But
that's what they gave all their guests when they got to the fan event. Phil Spencer gave them a little peck on the head and gave them a nice bear hug.
Well, that's an HR violation in and of itself. If that's what's going on at Xbox Studios, we have a whole other problem. Anyway, the writing was on the wall for Everwild. And, I know, like, as an outside observer who, granted, like, my focus is entirely on the DKU, and that includes what's happening at Rare. And so, like, I wasn't feeling good about Everwild. I had a brief spike of hope when they incorporated it into their holiday card at the end of last year. I was like, oh, maybe the rumblings I've heard are wrong, and actually Everwild is shaping up, and we're going to hear about it in June, and we're going to have a release date. And no. So Gary Napper apparently departed Rare at I think it was maybe sometime in June, I want to say. Before the layoffs, Gary Napper left. And that created further uncertainty around, Everwild's viability and what the hell is happening with the project. And that's how Greg Mails briefly returned, because they're like, oh, Greg, can you go back to Everwild, please? And then the layoffs happened, and Everwild was in the crosshairs. And again, like, there's no way to know what alternate reality, if Everwild had already been canceled, like last October or a year ago or 2 years ago, if it had already been canceled and the employees had already been assimilated into other teams and projects at Rare, if there would have been more across the board indiscriminate layoffs that would have targeted the studio, or if Everwild just provided a nice, easy, tangible, all right, them. And, like, I don't want to speculate or, come up with fan theories about people's lives and careers, because that's gross. But I do wonder, if Everwild was, don't even want to say mixed blessing, but if it did kind of provide that focus point of this absolute shit move of laying off 9,000 plus people across Microsoft, and oh yeah, anybody from Rare, Everwild, I don't know, but it happened. And because of Everwild and because of the layoffs, that means that Louise O'Connor, who was the executive producer of Everwild, but who Kongversation listeners will be more familiar with her work on games like Conker's Bad Fur Day. She actually got her start at Rare on the Conker team. So she's been there for quite a long time. Louise O'Connor was laid off from Rare. Will Overton, a beloved artist who was employed at Rare beginning in the Xbox 360 days, but he's worked on games like Jetpack Refueled, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. He actually already left the studio and returned in 2018, I think primarily working on Everwild. He's gone, and he announced that on social media. He was the first one we knew of.
I just want to say quickly, like before we continue, Will Overton, extremely talented artist, yes. Absolutely amazing man.
Yeah. I like Will Overton is one of the people I point to when people talk about all the good ones at Rare, and like they talk about the people who were there during the Nintendo years, and I'm like, you're aware Will Overton wasn't there during those years, but people have a blind spot to kind of when employees started, and there are just some figures you associate with Rare, they kind of rise to this prominence.
Like just such a nice art style, so good, just such a distinct style to it.
Yeah,
you can tell what a Will Overton art looks like.
And it sucks because he also has done stuff for Retro Gamer. Whenever they would do Rare cover stories, a lot of times he would provide the art for that. And it just sucks that you can't find a role for Will Overton. Yeah, he was working on Everwild. Who cares? Why is that's no reason to punish the man, lay him off. If you can't find a role for an artist of that caliber, what are you doing? And again, this is for anybody. I don't think any of these people should have been laid off. I don't care how big of a disaster Everwild was ultimately. These were all talented people. Sometimes projects just don't click. Sometimes it's not the fault of the people, it's the fault of management. Sometimes they're just circumstances. It's part of the creative process. There just shouldn't have been all these resources, all this money thrown at this game for this long. It is what it is. Of course, the one that has created the biggest controversy is that Everwild's cancellation has resulted in losing Greg Mayles in an official capacity at Rare, because Greg Mayles, it was announced he is retiring as a result of Everwild's cancellation. Of course, Greg Mayles wasn't even involved with Everwild the whole way through. He's come in to help it re-find its footing whenever it needs to, and of course he was unsuccessful in that regard, but let's not hold it against the man. Greg Mayles, we've already spoken to a great length on the Kongversation about what he means to all of us, what his ideas, what his creativity has meant for us and our fandom. We owe so much to Greg Mayles. I've called him the Western Miyamoto, and while that might be hyperbole, I still stand by it. It's my belief. The creativity, the worldview, the way he looks at games, it's obviously struck such a resonant chord with me that, I became a lifelong fanatic of this studio and all the game series he's worked on, because Greg Mayles' design is exactly what I was always looking for in video games. That's why I fell in love so hard with Donkey Kong Country. And yes, it's a team effort. I'm not saying that games like Donkey Kong Country or Banjo-Kazooie are auteur efforts made by this singular vision. And Greg Mayles has never held himself up as that, I should point out. Greg Mayles is probably the most humble motherfucker on the planet, given his creative output, given what he's accomplished. He is the most down-to-earth, unassuming, oh no, it was, I just came up with these ideas. I just did these doodles and Post-it notes. I didn't really, and he will never agree to the idea that he is great, that he is the personification of greatness in gaming. I have all the respect in the world for Greg Mayles, and that said, I am surprisingly calm about this news. And I thought once upon a time it would be, when this came to pass, I would be distraught. And I don't feel great about it, Adam, but I am also surprisingly zen-like when it comes to this. And maybe that's just my perspective on where Greg Mayles was in his career now versus a couple of years ago, because it sounds like Greg was already kind of toying with retirement when this all went down. And, you know, none of this was made public. And of course, we, the fans, are always hoping for that next great Greg Mayles game. And we're not thinking that Greg, who is very well off, all things considered, thanks to all the blockbuster games he's helped shepherd over the years, he's got other interests, and he was just kind of still at Rare because it was an outlet for his creativity. But I don't, like, I'm not saying that, like, oh, you know, no harm done, because I think any capacity losing Greg Mayles is harm done. But, like, knowing where his head was at, I'm like, okay, well, that sucks for all of us, but so long as he's happy, I can't really say much about that. Like, Greg Mayles doesn't owe the fans anything, and he's already provided us so much that I'm just like, you know, this is the end of Greg Mayles' role in video games. All the more power to him. What a stellar career it's been. Like, you hate to see it end on such a nothing note, but I'm also, like, just respecting who he is and what he's done. Now, I do think, let me just say, like, the cancellation of Everwild, and of, you know, like, that being the impetus for Greg Mayles retiring, I think it's completely asinine that you don't do whatever you can to retain Greg Mayles in any capacity, even if it's on just this permanent retainer, where it's like, hey, what are your ideas? Ideas guy, Greg Mayles. Like, he should be not just Rare's Miyamoto, but Xbox Studios Miyamoto, this, like, ultimate guru consultant who they can come to for one-off ideas.
Yeah, he should have the creative fellow moniker. You know, he should be the creative fellow that you go to and you know ask about ideas. And you know, the thing about Greg Mayles is that I would say that after Chris and Tim Stamper, you know, even maybe including Chris and Tim Stamper, you could almost argue that Mayles is probably the third or even the most important person at Rare for these past 35 years. And, you know, just on the ground floor of so many beloved and cherished series. Well, and it definitely sucks that we didn't know it at the time, but essentially Sea of Thieves was the last Greg Mayles that we would get, you know.
Yeah.
It sucks that Everwild had to be canceled, and Greg Mayles' 35-year tenure at Rare has to end with, well, sucks that you won't get to see that.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, 35 years is a very long time to be making video games. Like, 35 years, that's essentially a whole lifetime for making video games, you know? There's so much that's been done there, and, like, you know, obviously, I as much as, you know, Greg Mayles was such a force and did so many things for this company, like, if he does want to retire, if this is out of what he wants to do, you know, like, all the more power to him. If he doesn't want to make games until he's dead in the ground, he doesn't have to.
And, you know, like, I think the way Greg Mayles operates, it's kind of frustrating for some fans, because a lot of fans would have just loved him to just keep making Banjo-Kazooie games. And I think with Greg Mayles, like we've talked about it before, he seems to have this philosophy of, I'll do the one, I'll do the sequel where I improve and change the formula, and then I'm out. You know? And I think, like, talking, like, I've had the extreme fortune of talking with Greg Mayles face to face a couple of times in my life. And once I got over my shyness and nervousness and realized how incredibly like laid back and humble and sheepish in some ways the Greg Mayles actually is, you get the sense that he felt like he had nothing else to say about Banjo-Kazooie. And we want that next Banjo-Kazooie game from Greg Mayles, or my God, could you imagine Greg Mayles on Donkey Kong again? But like Greg Mayles, he said all he had to say about those, and then he moved on. And he moved on to the next idea and the next idea. And in some ways, Sea of Thieves does represent like the ultimate finale for Greg Mayles. When you look at his output and the reoccurring themes in his games, it makes all the sense in the world that he would go out on this huge, grand pirate adventure, because that is Greg Mayles. But I'm not saying like this is it for Greg Mayles. I could see a scenario where Greg Mayles comes back in a year or two with another studio brings him in to work on something. He's got the itch. He's got the next great idea. And, like this might not be the end of the career for Greg Mayles. It's just the end of Greg Mayles at Rare as we know it. Who knows?
It doesn't mean he can't be like a supervisor role of any kind for any studio in the future. But like I do want to say, like, in regards to Greg Mayles and even Craig Duncan, it almost felt like, despite Craig being the studio head of Rare, it kind of seemed like Greg Mayles was sort of almost, because of just how long he had been there and his history, he almost seemed like a co-head of Rare at that point as well. And as much as I commend them for really giving Rare a new image for the modern era and really catapulting the success of Sea of Thieves because of that, there is something to be said about, while they still do have an appreciation and a fondness for all the legacy IP that the studio had built, you got the feeling that as much as they loved and respected that stuff, that they were never really interested in revisiting those series themselves. Which is why, every now and then they would take pitches and lend games out to other developers. It's how we got Killer Instinct 2013. It's how we got Delilah Battletoads. It's all of this stuff. And obviously, if another studio wanted to make a Banjo game, that's still a big thing because, there's a lot of baggage for Banjo. It's the most, before Sea of Thieves, it was their most successful game to that date. It's the most beloved. It's the most cherished. You need a big guiding hand and supervision for something like that. But at the same time, it also feels that they were simultaneously maybe too overprotective of Banjo because, we don't know how many pitches for new Banjo games there have been since Nuts and Bolts. But it's been about 17 years since the release of Nuts and Bolts. We're getting very close to 20 years of the last Banjo game for Xbox 360. And I can't imagine that there have just been zero pitches for new Banjo games, There have probably been so many pitches for Banjo games, some probably not great, but I would maybe guess that some of those probably would have been pretty good. But we don't know ultimately if they would have because of how reserved, at that time, Craig Duncan and Mayles himself were with Banjo, And I do maybe feel like now that Joe Need and Jim Horth have been in this position for almost a year, maybe 8-9 months, and, just being able to talk to Joe Neat in the past couple of years myself, you get the feeling that he knows what makes Rare rare, and he's maybe also not afraid to try something new or something old for something new, you know? And I feel like we could maybe finally see a pitch for a Banjo game approved by both him and Horth.
I will say that it is new leadership at Rare. Craig Duncan, had his reasons for wanting to, I think, evolve the image of Rare and not be continually held back from the studio's identity from 1994 to 2002, which, let's be frank, like, they were being held back a little bit by that. They kind of broke away from it finally with Sea of Thieves, but at the same time, it is ridiculous when you have this wealth of IPs, beloved games, and you're just sitting on them like a dragon in a gold hoard. Like, at a certain point, you can't be precious with them. And I will say, like, I don't think Joe Need and Jim Horth are. And I think that there is a lot of people at Rare right now, still at Rare right now, who are passionate about Rare's entire legacy. And, there's probably more movement on that front than there's been in quite a long time. So it is like this weird feeling of, I was actually feeling really optimistic about the future of Rare before these layoffs. In some regards, I'm still feeling optimistic about the future of Rare. It's the whole corporate structure above Rare that I'm starting to not be optimistic about. So I think if this iteration of Rare, if they're left to their own devices, I think they're capable of pleasing quite a few fans. And we'll get into that, though. Like, that's a whole other discussion, really, from the layoffs themselves. But, like,
the way I see it, as long as, and this is the thing I'm most unsure about, as long as Xbox as a brand continues to exist, I think Rare as a studio will be safe.
Yeah. And look, this almost sounds like we're sugarcoating the layoffs. Let me be frank. Fuck these people. Fuck, like, everybody involved with these layoffs. May they never have a restful night of sleep again.
I honestly don't want to fuck them, That's reserved for something very special, and I don't think they've earned that.
Like, the reason we're taking such a nuanced view of this is because, it feels like there's just the pendulum swings of complete doomerism or, like, just, oh no, everything's fine, great, Xbox is a premier video game brand. And it's just like, I think Rare actually came through more unscathed than everybody else. And
I think that would be a good time to just talk about the other general, like, Xbox layoffs.
Well, I want to say one more thing about Greg Mails. All right, because I do think that there could have been a role for Greg Mails, however reduced, going forward. I think it's absolute shit that, like, maybe he wasn't, like, moved into this role beforehand, even in this, like, semi-retired state. I think they need to be more aware of the image of Rare, the brand of Rare, and what certain people mean to that. It would, like, imagine a world where Nintendo completely cut ties with Miyamoto. Wouldn't happen, right? Like, that would be so bizarre and unthinkable. And I know, like, Nintendo's done some pretty, like, shocking things in the past, like firing Gunpei Yokai or, like, Charles Martinet stepping down and their whole, like, that whole thing. But, Greg Mails should be in that Miyamoto role for Rare, or honestly Xbox Studios or the UK studios in their purview. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't see that value in that. And then again, I don't know why you wouldn't see value in Will Overton, Louise O'Connor. Everybody laid off at Rare.
Yeah, these people are still just as essential to what makes Rare rare, you know?
Yeah.
Louise O'Connor, like, hey, yeah, she was such a big hand and such a big lead as just like even in terms of like female representation at the studio itself with how big of a pedigree she was. And, you know, she was also part of so many projects, you know, like, hey, what happens if you do a new Viva Pinata now? Who do you get for Lifos? Or, you know, if you want Barry in another Conquer game, if you ever decide to make another Conquer game someday, like, you gonna grab her? Like, how do you grab Chris Seaver every time, you know?
Well, I mean, I think we just need to start the next Viva Pinata game with Lifos getting gunned down, just like Barry. That way, problem solved.
Professor Pester turns her into a pinata and smashes her just like candy everywhere.
Yeah, just give every Louise O'Connor character a gruesome death, just like Barry. And, there is no silver lining for any of these layoffs. I just, like, Greg Mails in particular, and this is more of a retirement than just, you know, straight laid off, but it just, I can't fathom how this transpired. And I know, like, Everwild, problem project for 11 years, but again, it's not even like, it's just poor management, and it's poor leadership from the top down, and it should have never gotten to this point.
I hope, unlike Males, that this is not, you know, obviously we didn't want this to be the end for Males also, but I hope this is not the end for Louise either. I hope she's able to find, like, if she still wants to work in video games, I hope she's able to find some really cool kick-ass job and just, like, immediately prove, like, Xbox leadership wrong with whatever she chooses to do next. You know?
It does really make the partial collapse of Playtonic sting all the more, given that Playtonic for so many years now has been the kind of the safety net for you leave Rare, you kind of wind up at Playtonic for a lot of these people. And, you know, now, like, clearly they don't have the budget to bring in anybody. So it is just the whole industry is contracting at an alarming rate. This is a problem that goes well beyond the UK gaming scene or Xbox studios. This is a problem. The work just isn't there. And it's only going to get worse the more they keep pushing AI on everything. More on that in a bit.
Yeah, shit sucks.
Shit sucks. So elsewhere across Xbox Game Studios, we got to talk about what else has happened, and this is more of a footnote given the Kongversation's purview. Like, I don't want to sell any of these people short or say, like, well, that's a lesser tragedy because these tragedies weren't DKU. But, you know, we do limit our focus here on the conversation. But yeah, like, we can talk a little bit about how these 9,000 plus layoffs affected the rest of Xbox Game Studios, particularly the Perfect Dark reboot.
Yeah. Perfect Dark, it's dead. And after showing up just last year, just rebooted and looking like it was alive. And honestly, you know, of course you don't want to say it again, and you don't want this game to be canceled. But one of the most alarming things for me this year was watching the Xbox showcase and getting that feeling that it doesn't feel like Perfect Dark's going to have a presence here. And that feels particularly bad. It feels like a big red flag, mostly due to the fact that they just made a big deal about it being re-revealed the year before.
The year before! Yeah. And I thought, like, granted, I haven't played the game. Granted, if I had played the game, I probably wouldn't play it well. But I thought that trailer looked fine. Like, I was like, okay, this is looking like a game. This is like, it's more than we ever saw from Everwild. So
it looked good, and there were a lot of things going on that it had been maybe a very nice vertical slice of the game where it was playable, but there wasn't much to it outside of how it was shown, but it was still kind of progress nonetheless. And so for it to get re-revealed and essentially have that false reassurance that, hey, this game's alive and it's looking good and it's probably going to come out within the next year or two, and then for it to just completely no-show was the most worrying thing that I thought. Because it's like, it made me immediately think, something really bad must have happened between this re-reveal and right now for it not to show back up again. And that's not good.
Yeah, and, it's just, to speak to your earlier points, it just creates such a lack of trust in anything Xbox announces. Like, what is even the point of tuning into these Xbox showcases when any hype that's generated might just be a false positive? Oh, that game looks cool. Never mind. It was canceled. We're never going to hear about it again.
It almost feels crazy because this game has been in tandem development with another game that is apparently coming out soon. I mean, I'm hopeful it's coming out soon, at least at this point. But that's Playground Games' Fable reboot because early to mid 2010s saw, just along with Rare and a bunch of other studio layoffs at the time, Microsoft and Xbox Games, they closed Lionhead Studios, the creators of Fable, and that was while they were working on a new Fable game that was even having an open beta at that point. Yeah. And, back in 2018, I think it was when rumors started that, hey, Playground Games, the creators of the Forza Horizon series and Xbox's brand new studio that they just built like 2 years ago, The Initiative, they are going to work on Perfect Dark and Fable. They're going to bring these two series back. And essentially, these games have both been in pre-production about the same time, about 7 years. But it's kind of interesting how even though both of these games haven't had much to show from them, for the most part, Fable has had its track record of showing up at more Xbox game showcases with more clear visions of what it's wanted to be. It's still been delayed multiple times, including just this year. But they were still able to show off gameplay. They were still able to show off cinematics. They were still able to give you a feel of how this game will eventually play.
Yeah.
Whereas it feels like Perfect Dark may have had the same problem as Everwild, where you are sold on the idea of, we haven't done anything with Perfect Dark since the Xbox 360. Let's change that. Great idea. What's the game about? We'll get to you when we get to that.
Yeah, like, for perspective, Perfect Dark was announced in December 2020. And I think it was the Game Awards. They had the little teaser for it then. And then nothing. And then it was restarted from scratch. And then it finally resurfaced at the 2024 Xbox Showcase in June. And, in this case, it's not just that the game was canceled. It's the entire studio behind it, The Initiative, shut down completely. Just...
Yep. People out of work. Not only that, but some people might forget that when they restarted development on this game, they brought in a whole nother studio to help support on it, and that was Eidos Montreal. Crystal Dynamics. Crystal Dynamics was brought in to be essentially a pillar support studio for the game with The Initiative, and those people also now, that's another unintended effect that Xbox probably didn't think about. Now a whole other studio not owned by them, those people are also out of the job.
Yeah. And it does create this. It sucks, but it also, like, talking about lack of faith in the Xbox brand or any promises, any hype is a mirage, a smokescreen. You know, it's something I've seen bandied about in the fandom since the layoffs happened. What happens when they do announce a new Banjo-Kazooie game is coming? Nobody's going to be excited about it. Yes, there is going to be the initial, oh, fucking finally, but then it's going to be like flop sweat every time a month or two goes by without hearing anything about it, because it's just going to wind up like Perfect Dark. It's just going to wind up like all these games that are vaporware.
And what happens when it gets announced and then it maybe misses 2 Xbox showcases, and then you're like, is this game going to come out? Yeah. We heard about it 2 years ago. They haven't given us an update since that trailer. Where's it going? Is it still alive? What are they doing?
I know, I lamented that we don't have a longer Donkey Kong Bonanza hype cycle, but that's the very opposite. That's an anti-hype cycle where, you're almost just, like, at a funeral for something that hasn't even been born yet. It's just miserable. And as somebody who does really, really want a new Banjo-Kazooie game, I'm not looking forward to it getting announced now. Like, I'm at the point where I'm like, yeah, well, I'll believe it when I'm actually playing it, because, like, at this point, like, I have faith in Rare as an institution, but I don't have faith in Xbox as a brand or as a Microsoft as a company. So, like, it really is just this unfortunate rock and a hard place that, like, the people who are fans of these games, of these franchises, of these studios find themselves in. How can we trust anything at this point?
I think the turbulent and development hell of Metroid Prime 4 really taught Nintendo that they cannot be like other studios and announce games when they are just entering production.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have definitely seen this shift in Nintendo, unlike other studios like Xbox, where at this point, Nintendo will essentially only reveal a game when it's about 3.5 months or maybe about a year out from development, from release.
Mm-hmm.
They do not want ever to have a Metroid Prime 4 debacle again, where they announce that it has just entered development and then it spends 8 years being made.
Which is amusing and kind of like almost ironic given what we're talking about, given that I feel the only reason they announced Metroid Prime 4 was to finally soothe all the backlash towards Retro not working on Metroid Prime 4 immediately after Donkey Kong Country Returns, and that Tropical Freeze should have been Metroid, another damn Donkey Kong Country debacle. And, you know, and then, like, we're finally getting Metroid Prime 4 now on the Switch too. But yeah, it's just like Nintendo did learn a valuable lesson, and I wish the rest of the industry would learn it as well.
Not only that, but the development of Metroid Prime 4 was so long that 2 other Metroid games were announced and came out during the development of that game. We got a remake of Samus Returns, which is excellent, by the way. Stellar 3DS title. Love what they did with that game. But then that same team, Mercury Steam, went on to make the next mainline Metroid. They made Metroid 5 Metroid Dread, and that game was also absolutely fantastic. You had 2 absolutely stellar and fantastic 2D Metroid games come out in the 8 years that it took them to make the next 3D Metroid.
Yeah. But we're not talking about Metroid. at the very least, Nintendo's getting their shit together when it comes to this kind of thing. And, Nintendo's a far more secretive company than Xbox has generally been. But we're also not seeing mass layoffs under Nintendo's thumb like we are Microsoft. So, I know people have been perturbed by Nintendo's practices going into the Switch 2 era. But you know what? I will at least take what they're doing over what Microsoft has been doing, how they've been treating their employees.
I think if the worst thing Nintendo is doing is charging $80 for Mario Kart, that's a pretty good position to be in compared to Xbox.
If I could spend $80 a month on Sea of Thieves and it would ensure people wouldn't get laid off, I would probably do it. I can't speak for everybody, and obviously I don't play much in the way of video games aside from DKU, so that's not really money that's going to be spent on anything else. But I don't know, it should never come to this where people's lives are just a rounding error on a little chart, number go up. Look at all the money we save. We're already a profitable as hell company. We didn't need to lay off these 9,000 plus people, but numbers have to keep going up. We have to show continual growth, even though it's impossible. Resources are finite. It's a toxic mentality that has basically ruined the notion of business and capitalism. And this is the state we are at with late stage capitalism, as it's called.
So not only the Initiative and Perfect Dark, but, just to briefly touch upon them also, Compulsion Games. They have made the game We Happy Few, and they just this year released a brand new Xbox game, South of Midnight. I think they had about a 20-25% workforce cut. But even worse than that, which I think might be one of the biggest insults to have happened from the Xbox layoffs, even more than Rare. Turn 10, the studio responsible for the Forza Motorsport series. This is a game series that, for so long at this point, has essentially been Xbox's version of Gran Turismo, where it's a realistic racing game sim, and a very popular one at that. So popular that it is, I've mentioned it in this episode also, it spawned a very successful spin-off series from Playground Games, Forza Horizon, where it's still realistic racing, but you kind of get to do that racing in really beautiful and exotic locales. Mm-hmm. Almost as if it's kind of like a more realistic version of the cruising games from Nintendo. But anyways, the regular Forza Motorsport, which is just straight up realistic racing, just like Sony's Gran Turismo, that studio has had a 50% workforce cut and is no longer working on their own games. They have essentially become a support studio for Playground Games while they work on Fable and Forza Horizon. They have essentially, in all but confirmation, been closed down, essentially. They're still alive, and I'm happy for the remaining 50% who still have work, but it's almost as bad as if you were to have shut down the whole studio.
Not great. And what message does that send? You can have success. You can make a successful game. Your work is still not valued.
You can be an important pillar of Xbox and Microsoft, and the next day you are gone like that. We were just talking about how Rare got off lucky due to the success of Sea of Thieves, but at the same time, even the success of Sea of Thieves doesn't guarantee Rare. Yeah. they could have easily decided, despite Sea of Thieves' still immense popularity and performance, they could have just decided, you know what? Let's slash some more people at Rare. Let's get rid of this team. Let's get rid of, there can be a smaller support team working on Sea of Thieves. We don't need this many people.
Right.
The game's doing well. Why do we need to pay more people?
Right.
Fuck you.
Yeah. And again, this is why I wanted to be clear, even though we are kind of looking at all angles from this and we're not just coming in with the rage. We are angry. We think this is just a raw deal all the way through. And it's just I'm tired. I'm so tired. The fact that this happened after the Platonic layoffs made me desensitize me a little bit more, where I was just like, yep, sounds about right. And I hate that we're at this point with the industry.
It's almost like after the Platonic layoffs, this was a very big inevitability to have happened. And, it was one of those things that, we were kind of also bracing for, because the week before it happened, there were rumblings, Sounds like big studio layoffs coming towards Xbox. Looks like some of them are going to be based in the UK. Yeah, it happened.
Yeah. And again, Rare wasn't touched as much as other studios, but it's still a blow. It's still a blow to morale, not just because all these people laid off, but their coworkers who are still there, they lost colleagues. I mean, it's just it does put into question, well, how safe are our jobs?
You can be the most popular Xbox brand out there and you're not safe. I mean, even in the past couple of days, there have been new reports that Halo Studios, the premier franchise for Xbox, probably the biggest success of Xbox's name in the past 20 years. Apparently, people are miserable at Halo Studios right now. They don't feel safe. There have been layoffs there. They are unsure about the future of Halo. That's not where one of your most prominent franchises should be in a state right now, where everybody who's still working on it is fearing for their lives and not confident that the next game will be good.
Yeah, I said anti-hype. That's what this philosophy is, but I was talking about the, fans, the fandom, it's impossible to get excited about anything. But it's also true for all the employees at Xbox Game Studios, because nobody feels safe or confident. And that's going to affect the products, that's going to affect the games, that stifles creativity, that just creates a culture of fear and dread and paranoia. And that's no way to run a business.
Yeah, obviously, in the Platonic episode, we mention it a lot, but, during the Wii U era, when Nintendo was failing the most, losing the most money they have ever lost in their entire lives, Iwata took initiative, personally apologized for the failure of the Wii U, even cut his salary in half.
Yeah.
And said, if I were to fire people, we would not only suffer such immense talent loss, but we would also suffer morale loss. And that's not something I'm willing to take. And we've talked about it, how it's an impossibility for that to ever happen in the US, mostly because not only will someone like Phil Spencer never consider that thought to take own personal fault for something like that, but if they were to ever try and take fault of that and do something like that, because Xbox is something that's not like Nintendo, where they have both US and Japanese investors, and Nintendo doesn't necessarily have to be beholden to their investors. Mm-hmm. If Phil Spencer were to one day come out and say, I apologize for the failure of Xbox, I am personally going to take a salary cut, and I want Xbox to be a better place for creatives and gamers alike, he would be shot into the sun and obliterated by U.S. investors and Microsoft as a company. He would essentially be launched into the sun where he would have no career after that.
Yeah. It's a toxic,
because that would be him taking fault and stepping up. And that is not what investors and US-based people want to hear. They want to hear that there's nothing but success. And if that were to ever happen, the whole Xbox would essentially be shut down at that point.
Yeah, it's a toxic mentality that has gripped these mega corporations. But more than that, we're talking about like this vaporware. Like Everwild was just never a workable game. But this whole idea of continued growth, no fault ever to be had from the people, sitting behind the big desk. That is just as much a fantasy as a workable Everwild. The problem is they wield all the power. So they get to continue putting like good money after bad ideas, and they continue to get negative results, and they continue to make shit decisions. And the thing is, Microsoft is profitable as is.
Yeah. But before I tear more into Phil Spencer, I do want to say, like, again, as we stated at the beginning of this episode, this is more than just an Xbox problem. This is a Microsoft in general problem. Because the thing about Microsoft right now is that they have heavily invested billions, maybe even trillions of dollars at this point into the idea that generative AI can be profitable for them and that they can make it a very profitable thing, despite the fact that at this point, most Americans and people at large have wholeheartedly rejected the idea of generative AI. And at this point, you would think that after such a big loss in preventing people from adopting generative AI, that Microsoft would stop there. Instead, they doubled down. They essentially invested an additional 30 to $50 billion to try and get people to still adopt generative AI when it is clearly not going to happen at this point. And you're only setting yourself up for a big tech burst in that, similar to 2021 and 2022 when you had NFTs implode because they were useless.
Right.
And that's where...
Yeah, like the investment in AI is far more than NFTs, and like it has had a ruinous effect across all aspects of our life. I mean, not just tech jobs, not just the industries, but also just, oh my God, like you can't use search engines anymore that we previously relied on. Like the internet is just a wasteland of, I know slop is just like a term everybody's getting sick of.
But it's true. Like, look at Google. Look what's happened to their SEO.
Yeah.
Completely shot with their, just having to so heavily try to push this Gemini AI function onto their phones and into their search engines just because they realized they invested too much money in here, and admitting that they fucked up would be disastrous for them. So they have to still keep trying to push it here, while, Google's SEO and AI overviews are some of the most unreliable and, most comedic things that people have ever seen and witnessed, there's just nothing we can do about it except keep rejecting it until the point that a burst is made onto this.
The problem is not enough people are rejecting it, so the burst is being delayed. And, who is the Xbox executive who said that the laid off employee should seek therapy via, Chat GPT?
I have no idea. I know what you're talking about. I do not know his name. But
yeah,
it is
didn't,
such a wild thing to have said.
I didn't retain that info because I immediately got nauseated and I had to turn away upon seeing it. But yeah, and look, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, fuck him. Because he's like the driving hand. Like, I've seen a lot of criticism, and well-deserved, towards Phil Spencer as of late. But I mean,
we'll get into that in just a sec.
Okay. But yeah, like, the CEO of Microsoft has the bloodiest hands out of anybody involved with this.
I mean, not just bloody figuratively with these mass layoffs. And
The
investment in AI. There are other things that Microsoft as a company is doing that is making their hands bloody. Like maybe, obviously I don't want to bring the mood down even more and make things a bummer, but Microsoft is actively participating in a genocide of a country right now, and it's not going well for them.
Yeah, like, I wasn't going to bring war crimes into this. I was mostly going to say, oh, man, like, Louise O'Connor, Will Overton, great males. But yeah, we can bring in war crimes, too. And then, like...
I do want to take this moment to briefly say that this is something beyond Phil Spencer's hands. Unless he comes out and says something so incredibly stupid that I can't say it. But I have to assume that Phil Spencer is not a fan of what Microsoft as a company is doing.
Yeah, Phil Spencer isn't the one with his finger on the big red button, like Doctor Strange style.
Yeah, he's not the one asking
Dr.
the Microsoft drones in AI to explode parts of foreign Middle Eastern countries.
I said Doctor Strange, the Benedict Cumberbatch Marvel character. I meant Doctor Strangelove. The classic Stanley Kubrick 1960s anti-war dark comedy.
Thankfully, I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch is in support of this either. Thankfully,
I haven't asked him though. That's the problem. I don't know what to believe anymore. Do I believe in a new Perfect Dark game coming? I can't believe in that. Do I believe in Everwild? Can't believe in that. So who do I trust? Am I no longer a Cumberbitch?
You can't trust Doctor Strange. I mean, listen to the name. How can you trust a man that's so strange? He's unpredictable.
Jeff's big complaint about that is, he looks forward in time and he sees, like, the one possibility they win. But those are just the possibilities in which he ensures his survival. So, like, what are his motives? Like, how many times did they win without Doctor Strange's help? Like, if Doctor Strange got, like, taken out by Thanos pretty quickly, how many alternate realities would that have made where they succeeded far earlier? So anyway, fuck Doctor Strange is what I'm saying. But
who's to say he didn't get laid off also? Things suck right now.
Things suck right now, yeah. Like, I have, like, levels of distaste right now. Microsoft is at the highest. Xbox Games leadership is below that. I'm not upset with Rare though. Like, this is beyond them. And the only thing I am a little perturbed about is that they let Everwild get to this point. But it's just there's so many things that we don't know about what went on in Everwild's development that I don't even feel right about getting too upset, too, like, hot under the collar about what went on there, because, again, we're outsiders, we're observers. Even though we're well-read, we still don't know all the details and never will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do want to take this time after that to now mention that, as much as we've been saying, some of this stuff goes beyond, Phil Spencer and Xbox in general. I do think there is plenty to be frustrated with Phil Spencer about, because there have been a lot of very poor mistakes. Obviously there have been great things during Phil Spencer's tenure at Xbox. And for a good while, things did seem very good. But there have been very big miscalculations on his part. and very big mistakes that he should not have made. And I think two of the biggest ones to obviously talk about are both the introduction of Game Pass and, essentially a combined nearly $30 to $50 million spent on buying so many game studios that, in theory, would help pay off more than it actually has. Let's start. Yeah, I mean, which one would you like to start off with? Because they both kind of go into each other. I would say let's start with the buyouts. So Microsoft, these past couple of years, these past 7 years essentially, have invested a lot of money into buying other studios. And the two biggest ones were Bethesda Softworks in 2018 and the announcement of Activision Blizzard back in 2023, I believe, which did not happen until a year later because it was such a clusterfuck. But both of these buyouts combined are about $30 to $50 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of money to spend on these studios, especially when, like a brand like Xbox, you are consistently, for this generation, been in third place the entire generation and are the least profitable section of your company. Buying these studios is a big risk because not only are you spending an exorbitant amount of money, but you're hoping to recoup double that by buying them. And that's not what's happened, It's
magical thinking, wishful thinking, and like dream big, but also when you're buying up all these studios, you are also buying up a large part of the industry itself. So if you steer all these studios into a rock, you're taking the industry with you. So I know, like, they're not thinking in these terms like, oh, well, this could be risky for the video game industry itself, because all they care about is Xbox and Xbox Game Studios' bottom line.
I don't think for most people how insane it is to think about the fact that Xbox, because of the Activision Blizzard merger, they now own the most profitable and popular game series of all time in Call of Duty. And they still are not making enough money to offset that.
Yeah, it's beyond belief almost. Like and look, I've spoken well of Phil Spencer like a decade ago. I mean, we had a running joke. We called him Saint Phil Spencer because when he took control, after the like dark days of Don Matrick, like it seemed like a refreshing change was afoot at Xbox. And even from the way like they built up Rare and talked so highly of Rare, and we saw all this integration that we hadn't seen before and all these new ideas, and it was really exciting. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm on board with this. And for a while, for a while, like you said, it was going well, or it seemed like it was going well.
We even had that really, at that point, we had that one quote, the "Let Rare be Rare" from him,
Yeah.
Let them do what they do best. Let them create these experiences.
I would say maybe around the time of the pandemic, a little bit before, last half decade plus, things haven't been going so hot.
And, that also, with this talk about all these mergers and buyouts, that sort of slides into the second big mistake, which is Xbox Game Pass, because, obviously there's been a lot to talk about with Xbox Game Pass recently. There have been some true things, some not, big things about whether or not Xbox Game Pass is actually actively profitable if, you don't count first-party development costs, which did end up being a fake thing. Apparently, they do count first-party development costs when factoring in Xbox Game Pass.
Right.
And it apparently is profitable, but I can also see it as a thing where, despite it being profitable, it is also not as profitable as it should be. Because what's Microsoft and Xbox have been doing with Game Pass, as much as it is kind of goodwill towards gamers, it's an incredibly stupid move business-wise, because you are making all of your prime games that are supposed to be AAA, very expensive games, you are making years of these works free, essentially, for like $20 a month.
Yeah.
And you are actively losing out on that, income for Xbox sales by selling Game Pass. Obviously, PlayStation and Nintendo users, when some of these games go third party, they're not going to be free, but like, the biggest people who are going to play your game are still on that console. It's still going to be the Xbox fans. And if they don't have to pay $60 to $70 for these games, now $80, because, Xbox announced earlier this year, we're going to start doing $80 games also. That's just not going to be profitable for your main audience. It's great that they're happy, but you're losing hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars at this point by essentially charging $20 for a new Indiana Jones or Call of Duty,
Yeah.
And that can't be good.
No,
that's not helping you regroup nearly $30 billion you spent to make these decisions, which also recent reports have said that the idea of Game Pass growth has been the reason why Xbox was allowed to pursue these purchases of Bethesda and Activision, because the heads of Xbox made a promise that this would get more people to Game Pass, despite the fact that Game Pass, while relatively successful, has been stagnant for about 3 years at this point.
It's been stagnant because it's on the third place console. Like, I know, like, and this is also like the brand of Xbox is so nebulous these days. Well, Xbox is not just a console. It's, you can play anywhere, and it's just this floating thing in the cloud. Ooh.
And it's like, you take all this into account, and it's no wonder why, essentially the people above you at Microsoft are essentially telling you, you have wasted nearly $50 billion on no growth these past 5 years. You have to start laying people off or take accountability, which he's never going to do. Because the easier thing is, because the easier thing to do is put other people's lives at stake for him.
Yeah.
And I saw a friend of the show, Liam Robertson, he had a very good post about it during when the layoffs were happening last week. And it was essentially, to paraphrase it a little, obviously a lot of people are justifiably blame Don Matrick for really tanking the Xbox brand before he abandoned ship before the Xbox One release, because it was his idea to make the Xbox One a big entertainment push instead of a console push, to have all these DRM restrictions in it, no used games, online only, and it essentially immediately eroded like a decade of goodwill that Xbox had built up to at that point. And was a big, difficult thing for Phil Spencer to turn around. But at one point, you could argue that Phil Spencer did turn it around. and did start doing better things. And there was briefly some good success with the Xbox brand and Phil Spencer. But, at this point, so many years into his tenure, and so removed now from Don Mattrick, nearly 12 years since Don Mattrick has held any sort of power at Xbox, you have to stop blaming Don Mattrick for what's going on, because everything happening now is now the fault of the bad business decisions from Phil Spencer, from Matt Booty, from Sarah Bond. This is their Xbox. It hasn't been Don Mattrick's Xbox for a very long time, and he's got to start taking responsibility for that.
Yep. And yeah, like Game Pass is just, again, it's more of an epidemic than just what's happening at Xbox. It's chasing the Netflix model. Oh, we need like our equivalent of a streaming subscription, because that's the future. The future isn't in owning the products; it's in having access to them. And and yes, like on the surface, it is like savings for the consumer. If you do want to play all the new games, you're getting them on the cheap, especially if they're games you wouldn't continue to replay. But it's just bad financial sense in the long run, because you've effectively shrunk your income, and that income that would then go towards these studios. And yeah, like it's kind of ridiculous that it was allowed to get to this point. Like, I look at Nintendo's answer, Nintendo Switch Online, and it's just this curated selection of classic games. They're not putting Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza behind an NSO subscription.
Then, you could even look to PlayStation, Xbox's rival, and how they have revamped a couple years ago. They revamped how PlayStation Plus works. There are 3 tiers of PlayStation Plus. There is PlayStation Plus Basic, which is essentially called Essential. You get your online gaming, and you get free monthly games, which Xbox stopped doing free monthly games with Gold and Xbox Live to completely go all in on Game Pass. Mm-hmm. Bad idea, because PlayStation still gives you 3 free games every month. Whether they are the most high quality or maybe sometimes some underrated or overlooked budget titles, doesn't matter. They still give you 3 games a month. If you're at that base level, if you go up to the extra tier, you get a game catalog that is similar to Game Pass, but the difference is most of these games on this catalog have been available at least for 3 years at least. They have already essentially run through their lifespan. They're essentially in their getting picked up during their sales era. And for those games, getting the chance to be on this game catalog is now another new fresh batch of people can now come into this game without really being too bad on their bottom line, Yeah. And if you upgrade to premium, just like with Nintendo Switch Online, you can also get a small curation of classic PlayStation games from PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and even PlayStation Portable. And it's not every game, but they have a nice little mix of classic games and like kind of under the radar games as well. And that's kind of a neat thing to do, You're not going all out. They're not re-releasing The Last of Us for the 8th time and putting that up immediately for free. Maybe they'll put it up 2 to 3 years down the line when, it's not super profitable for them anymore. But, they essentially know that basic, they know how to work that model.
Right. Yeah. It's a mess. It is a complete and utter shit show. And after such a promising start to the Phil Spencer era, but yeah, at this point, you notice I haven't called him Saint Phil Spencer in quite a long time.
It's been a hot minute.
Yeah, no, we've reconvened. We've revoked sainthood, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, what else can we really say? I do have more thoughts about Rare and the future of Rare, but we do have a few calls. I did want to partially open this up to our audience. Now, I didn't advertise this episode ahead of time. I didn't do any promotion for it because, again, I felt icky about, like, ooh, become a DK Vine patron, $5 and up, and listen to us talk about real people losing their jobs. No. But I did let our patrons know ahead of time, hey, we're going to be doing this episode, and you can call in if you want. We'll take a few calls. So let's play. Let's play our calls. We'll respond to each one as we go, and then I'll try to leave with some words of hope about Rare and Rare fandom and what the future may entail. Maybe I'm hopelessly naive. Maybe I am a dreamer, but at least I'm not throwing billions of dollars away chasing a dream that will never come to fruition.
Let's be naive together, Hyle.
All right. Let's play our first call together.
Hello, DK Vine and Hyle and guest. This is Traveler of the Stars. I'm calling in about Rare. I know I already left a call, actually right when the news dropped, but I kind of wanted this call to be the definitive one true call. Now that I've reflected upon everything, that one was more sad. This one I want to get a little bit agitated because I think it's fair. But it's so far platonic. And you'll know how I like to usually be positive. Listeners, go back to all my numerous crappy calls that I leave on the conversation. I usually like to be positive, but in this case, I'm going to get a little heated. Microsoft laid off 15,000 plus employees this year to embrace AI. And, just because it's the closest comparison relevant to DK Vine, you can say a lot of things about Nintendo. They have plenty of flaws because they are a corporation. But they at least care about video games as an art form and making them, and they treat their employees right most of the time. Microsoft do not give a shit about games as an art form. And Hyle, I love you. Again, listeners, go back to all my calls. I always say how great Hyle looks because he looks great. And I always believed Hyle when it came to DK EPD when people doubted you. Called about that as well. But I'm going to give you a little grief. You were naive to think that Rare would be spared from Microsoft's coins. Now, I wholly understand why you thought the way you did. Logically, you would think, oh yeah, let's see if this is this breakout success. Microsoft would spare Rare. Totally understandable. But no, Microsoft, if you are a company, do not get purchased by Microsoft. They will eventually get to you and cut you off. And, I don't know. I also got to say, obviously DK Vine promotes the Rare way of thinking. It spits in the eye of the Nintendo Miyamoto way of thinking, which I know is kind of tongue-in-cheek and joking. But, in this case, the Rare way of thinking failed, and it fell on its face. And I think it's fair to say. Everwild floundered for 11 years because they could not think of a strong gameplay hook. It seems like they came up with the environmentalism story angle or whatever first, and they couldn't think of a gameplay thing. I think it's fair to say that failed them. And I honestly can't blame Microsoft for cutting it off finally. Though I do have to say, of course, one, I don't want any layoffs. But two, the problem with Microsoft is that they don't know how to lead. They are extremely hands-off, and when they finally come in, their basically first instinct is to shut it down. They don't lead. And it's very frustrating. And, I just don't know where Rare is going to go from here. And I'm not trying to be sensationalist about it or doom about it. I posted a thread on DK Vine, shout out to Crumbling Cutthroat and all the responses. But, where do they go from here? Everwild floundered for 11 years, and once CSVs really starts to wind down, what will be left of them? Greg Nails and Louise O'Connor left, and I'm not going to say all the good ones left because that's bad to say. But I think what's left of that old school Rare, is dead. I'm pretty sure, right? I don't know. I feel bad saying that, but I just think that's fair to say. Anyway, that's all that I got. See ya.
Well, thank you for the call, Traveler of the Stars. I don't think I was naive.
First off, I want to say I'm honored to be the new Jeff now. I'm sorry to our longtime staffer, Jeff Onan, but these things just sort of have to happen at some point. But I will happily embrace the title of Jeff from here on out, and I will try to make the best of it.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I don't think I was naive, per se, when it comes to Rare wouldn't be touched by layoffs. I think, like, looking at it from a perspective of a year or two ago, before, like, this real gross push towards AI and implementing AI and everything, like, it held true. Rare did not get touched until this round of layoffs, and this was an extremely small, relatively speaking, number of people who were laid off. Doesn't make it right, and I'm not excusing it. No, fuck this. Fuck this completely. And
yeah, I don't think it was essentially that we never expected this to happen. I think it was more like we didn't want it to happen, but, you know, with the inevitability of the games industry and how things work, you know, it was sort of an inevitability. But the hope is that the hope is that it's always just the least painful it can be. Still painful, but, you know, the least amount.
Yeah. And, like, look, I know you said this isn't what you meant, but I just wanted to say I've always rejected the all the good one ethos. And this kind of meme, this kind of almost mantra that was started up around the time of the buyout, usually by Nintendo loyalists who wanted to completely diminish Rare's contributions. They started that up and they used Free Radical as their like go-to example. Well, all the good ones at Rare left to form Free Radical when it was basically, you know, the GoldenEye team. But people didn't know who did what at Rare, and it sort of became this soothing tonic they poured over their wounds, where I was like, oh, okay, all the good ones at Rare had already left, so this isn't really Rare that we're losing. Rare is already dead. But that's never been the case, of course. I mean, Greg Mayles, those people were diminishing Greg Mayles' contribution. They didn't even know who Greg Mayles was, but, you know, there's another side to that coin as well that I want to push back against, and it's that only the people who have been at Rare for 25 years or longer have any value or make Rare rare. Because so much of the new blood that has been hired are a part of that ethos, are a continuing part of that spirit at Rare. This idea that the only worthwhile creative minds are the ones who are there developing for the Super Nintendo, the N64. I think it's ugly and dismissive, and I'm not accusing you of saying this, Traveler. I just wanted to get it out there because it was going to have to come up at some point in this episode. And you know, I recall even saying back long ago that even when Greg Mayles would leave, Rare would still be Rare. Rare could still be Rare.
Yeah, and you know, we were just talking about it. Someone like Will Overton, who has not been there for 35 years, he has still, in his time, been able to make such a big impact on Rare's legacy, and just like with his art style and what he contributed to the projects that he worked on. Not only that, but like as far as we know, there are still like plenty of people who have been there for nearly as long as Greg Mayle's still there. I think, as far as I know, I think Paul Makachek is still working at Rare to this day.
Robin Beanland.
Still toiling away.
Yeah.
Robin Beanland. Paul Cunningham, who the last time we were talking about him was in 2019 because he was the one that helped shepherd Banjo's Smash Ultimate render. With Sakurai and his team. He's still there. He worked on the original Diddy Kong Racing. You know, he was one of the big wheels on that team. He's still working at Rare. He's still on projects. And even, you know, some of the newer people who haven't been there for that long, they're starting to be there for nearly 20 years. Like James Thomas, who came in during the Xbox era, just like Will Overton. left such a big impression, and having met him multiple times, like, what a genuinely friendly person, and just such a nice, talented individual. Not only that, but like the things he's contributed to, like Viva Pinata and Nuts and Bolts, injects such a big, great, friendly atmosphere into everything, you know?
James Thomas is the fucking man. I adore James Thomas. I'm like, that was a highlight of getting to go to E3 or getting to visit Rare, is just talking with James Thomas. And I know you got to meet him as well. And it's just like, yeah, like, and the wild thing is, like, yeah, he's the friendliest guy. Like, he'll see you from across the room and he'll approach you like, hey, and he'll just strike up a conversation with you.
It's always so funny to me that they based the shittiest character in the Banjo universe off of him, and he couldn't be more of a different person if you tried, you know?
Yeah. And it's like, who's Professor Chops based on? I want to meet that guy. That's the way it breaks down. No, but you know, I know, like, I'm a Rare fan and I generally speak well of Rare, but I'm also going to just, like, call out Rare for its failures. And Rare's had plenty of failures in the Microsoft era. Like, talking about the last decade, a lot of my perspective shifted on Rare under Microsoft. Because once upon a time, I was one of those fans who was like, Microsoft is holding Rare back. They're doing this and that and the other. And oh, if only Rare could be free of Microsoft's oppressive grip. But you come to find out, a lot of Rare's woes during that era were self-inflicted, or at the very least circumstantial.
I think what it boiled down to was Rare was not only not ready for how much game development would change and become longer and more extensive, because they were so used to pumping out 3 to 4 games a year almost. Mm-hmm. And just for development cycles to be longer, but also not having much of a guiding hand with Microsoft executives, as we've talked about. And, you know, even Travel of the Stars did bring up a lot of the points we mentioned. Microsoft, turns out, they are actually the opposite. They're very hands-off. Yeah. They don't do a lot of check-ins until they're essentially forced to. They have perpetually been in last place. You know, obviously, I don't believe in things like the console wars, but in just terms of console success, the Xbox Series and the Xbox One are still the least profitable of their generations, you know, and they are consistent failures for Microsoft. And even with some of the things they've learned, some of the things have still stayed the same, where they have just chosen not to take that feedback of the failure into account.
Yeah. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying, like, Microsoft isn't blameless. Of course, especially nowadays. Yes, absolutely. I'm just talking about from the vintage era, where I would blame Microsoft for everything, and I would say, well, it's not Rare's fault. No, I think the Stampers really had a rough time adjusting to the way the industry was going, the way games were starting to be made. They couldn't make that adjustment quick enough. And that's why we didn't really see Rare starting to turn around until after they left. But, you know, I will say that Rare was still pumping out great stuff in that era. You know, it hasn't just been Sea of Thieves and nothing else over the past 20 plus years. I would even argue that Perfect Dark Zero is the only true clunker they've ever really released. Like, even the Kinect sports games, it's not what people wanted. As a Rare fan, it's certainly not what I wanted, but it's still the best bowling ever on any platform. Like, for what those games were, I think they might have done it best of all.
For as much as, you know, we talk about how the Kinect era was kind of miserable for Rare fans in general, the thing about it is that the success of those games, just like Sea of Thieves before it, helped keep the studio afloat in a very turbulent time for that company.
Yeah.
So while it wasn't what the fans wanted, and maybe not even what Rare wanted to do themselves, they were sort of beholden to the success of it and Connect in general to keep that going in order to protect themselves.
Yeah. So, like, I look at what Rare has done and their output and how they've been able to weather turbulent times in the past. And look, like, I felt far worse things about Rare's future in the past than I do right now. I think, like, their benchmark of quality hasn't really faltered, and they've been able to eventually adapt and respond to changing circumstances. So I'm not really worried about Rare. I have faith in Rare as an institution. It's everything else that I'm worried about. So,
Yep.
Thank you for the call. The very righteously angry Traveler of the Stars, a side we don't often see when you call in. But thank you for saying how great I looked. Nonetheless, I always appreciate it.
And once again, thank you for bestowing me the new title of Jeff.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go ahead and play our second caller.
Hi, Kongversation. Carson here, and I just wanted to speak my piece about all this mess. I have and have always had faith in Rare and the people that have worked there both throughout its history and now. But it's demoralizing that they are under the infrastructure of Microsoft, which I have no faith in or any respect for. Microsoft displays the ugliest tendencies of late-stage capitalism, from gobbling up development studios and publishers like a whale to doing regular layoffs to bump up their quarterly reports to cutting costs by bringing in more contracted workers that they don't have to pay benefits to. There is just no fixing a company like that, especially when the leadership revels in their own incompetence and hubris. From what I have read from other developers that have worked with Xbox game studios, there are recurring problems in dealing with management. They are fickle and never seem to know what they want. They will tell a studio to do something, then come back 6 months later and say, hey, that's not what I wanted, and have them just burn through time and talent as people get frustrated with the perpetual churn. Both Everwild and the Perfect Dark reboot seem to have shared that problem. Both clearly had problems on the creative side to come together, but they were probably also hindered by these executives coming in and continually flipping the script. Even before the final cancellation, both games have shuffled through several creative leads and designers, which I would wager they got fed up dealing with this churn. So what happens now? It is hard for me to remain optimistic about Rare's future when they are still under the thumb of these executives who just keep doubling down on these awful practices. Thieves was able to become a huge success, and you would think that would mean Rare is safe now, but I'm not so sure. Even if there was no salvaging Everwild, it was so punitive and unnecessary to lay off its team. Microsoft was effectively punishing Rare for the project failing to come together, even though I would bet their poor management had a large hand in this outcome. I do not see the situation improving without serious internal reform and a change in management, which is just unlikely to happen. I do not mean to say that there is no hope for Rare's future, but it is increasingly clear that Microsoft cannot be trusted to manage and maintain their game development subsidiaries.
Well, thank you for the call, Carson. That was
very well put.
I was going to say eloquent. It was it was a stinging indictment against Microsoft and Xbox game studios as a whole.
Yeah, I think he essentially touched on everything we touched upon, you know, the very lax management style of most of the executives. And, you know, I completely agree with the idea that, you know, even if something, you know, even if it's struggling from a creative standpoint, that is when you have an executive look at it and maybe make a suggestion. But at this point, when an executive kind of either has no suggestion or is constantly changing what they want out of that suggestion months from now, that's where you start getting this really bad management problem where they're too relaxed, and then when they do want something, they're not confident about it.
Right. Yeah, it's a clear lack of leadership on top. To speak nothing of the greater ills plaguing Microsoft as a whole, above them. And I don't know, like, again, I have faith in Rare as an institution. It's just a shame that they were a part of this greater maelstrom, this mess.
I think that was the most eloquent way to put it. There is still faith in Rare, but there is not faith in Xbox.
Yeah, which is why it's kind of a weird feeling to have, because I feel like, and I don't say if Rare was left to their own devices, because of course Everwild, but that was just a corner of Rare. Like it doesn't necessarily mean like Rare as a studio as a whole isn't capable of doing great things beyond Sea of Thieves. It's just Everwild should have never gotten to the point it got to. It should have probably been canceled years ago when it was clear that, this isn't working. But, yep, here we are. I do think that I am not as nihilistic about this as a lot of people are. And maybe that's just my perpetual glass half full, sunny optimism. Again, maybe I'm the fool. Fair enough. But life is so miserable right now, I can't just go completely without hope. At least we have 3D Donkey Kong, right? At least Donkey Kong's in good shape.
Yeah, I mentioned it after the recording of the Platonic episode, but it was one of those things where I was talking to Mitchell Wolf the day before we recorded, and, we were kind of talking about how it's kind of unfair that the DKU is never able to just function as it should be from all angles and be as healthy as it can be. There's always got to be something wrong between Donkey Kong disappearing off the face of the earth for 11 years, aside from cameos, or say just once Donkey Kong's finally back in the spotlight and stronger than ever as a brand is when both other sides go up in complete flames.
I wouldn't even say Rare's in complete flames right now. That's the thing. Like, they still are supporting a very successful game. Like,
yeah, they just had their community showcase where they mapped out the rest of the year, and there's some pretty cool stuff happening. Private servers, hey, that's cool for the future of the game.
Yeah, like, it's weird because it is like, like Rare had a very bad week and then they dusted themselves off and now it's business as usual. And I don't know, like Platonic is the one I'm more worried about, given that they lost about 30% of their staff. And
it's one of those things where I still want to be optimistic about the future of Platonic, while at the same time there's no denying that things look a little bit more grim for them than it should.
But, we love a comeback story. It's like Rocky.
We would love to be completely wrong. We'd love to come back in like a year or even 2 years and just be like, so glad that's behind us. Glad Platonic rebounded. Glad that Rare finally has a new game,
Yeah.
But we're just speaking from the heart right now and just hoping things can get better in such a rotten time.
Well, I will try to leave this episode on a note of positivity. We do have another call that I want to play. So let's continue to deal with these emotions and this negativity, and then I will try to end on it won't be that rousing because I'm kind of tired. I'm getting over a little illness, and I just don't have it in me to really rally the troops right now. But I will do my best to end on a note of optimism rather than just succumbing to the misery that is all around us everywhere in every aspect of our lives, except Donkey Kong games right now.
Sounds good.
All right, great. All right, let's play that third call.
Hi, this is SnakeFighter64. Don't know if I missed the cutoff date for this because you've delayed it, but if not, then whatever. I just wanted to reiterate what I posted on Blue Sky the day that all this happened and sum up my thoughts on what happened with Rare. The layoffs suck. Microsoft sucks for doing this, for just firing these people just to make the shareholders more money. But also, I kind of don't mourn any of the games that we lost. Like, Everwild was in development hell, and everything we saw about the game made it just look like it wasn't going to be fun, at least to me. Like, they didn't have a hook for it, and I guess that might have been why it ended up getting canceled, but it just makes me not sad to see it go. The Perfect Dark reboot, I hope this means I hope we can still get another Perfect Dark game in the future, but this one did not look like it was going in the direction it should be, unless I missed my guess. The series has always been kind of like a cyberpunk Blade Runner kind of future with James Bond elements, and this one it was like the wrong kind of post-apocalypse. It was like decaying buildings covered in foliage post-apocalypse, which just didn't seem right for the series. And again, I could be wrong. That could have just been something early because I wasn't following the game's development that closely. I was just going to play it when it came out, but now I'll never get to. And I'm not that sad to see it gone. God damn it, I'm already forgetting his name. By the way, I keep wanting to say George Marlowe. The Great Mighty Pooh did not retire. Greg Mails. Greg Mails, it's sad that he's gone, but I didn't like Sea of Thieves. In my opinion, his magic is kind of gone. So, just let the man enjoy his retirement, and maybe he doesn't make games like Sea of Thieves anymore. That's I don't know. It sucks that the way these things ended up happening was because of Microsoft being a typical corporation, i.e. greedy fucks. But I'm not sad that anything that was canceled. I don't mourn any of these games. Good night.
Well, thank you for the call, Snake Fighter. Agree to disagree on Greg Mails, because I still feel like Sea of Thieves was brimming with the Mailsian design philosophy, the magic, the immersion of really believing in the game world and feeling really just this, like, balance of beyond just the gameplay, the smash, dig things up, sail here, sail there. It was more about, like, environmental storytelling and little touches here and there still really made it a Greg Mails game to me.
Yeah. We talk about how, Sea of Thieves isn't for everyone, and I would say at the end of the day, like, a lot of this stuff is really just personal taste, and,
right.
it can't be helped if something just doesn't click with you, because that's just what happens sometimes, Sometimes you want to get into something, and it just doesn't work out the way you wanted it to. But that's not to say that other people couldn't be excited for it also, because people were equally excited for Everwild still. We talk about the fact that it really didn't have a gameplay hook, and it was only based on vibes, but they were strong vibes, And same thing with Perfect Dark. While it might not exactly be something that you would consider in line with the series, there were still plenty of people who saw what had been presented to them and thought, oh yes, this nails the tone of Perfect Dark exceptionally well. I can't wait to see how they expand upon this more. And I think one of the harder things with both these games is that we didn't see much of them, as much as, if they don't do it for you, then they don't do it, and that's fine. But at the same time, there's also an argument to be made that they were not able to do anything for you because they never had the chance to show off more of what they could do.
Right, exactly. Well said. I think that for me, like, Everwild is not a game I mourn or I really had any enthusiasm for once it just kind of went up in smoke from the public perspective. But I never actually saw gameplay. I never actually saw the game. I saw cinematic trailers and that's it. And I think had I actually gotten a taste of it, and clearly, like, it wasn't working, but that being said, I'm sure there was some value in there. I'm sure there was some hook in there that would have made it more enticing and would have got me juiced for it had I known a little bit more. But it's all a matter of perspective and personal taste. To your point, Sea of Thieves, I've basically made my peace with that, the fact that Sea of Thieves does not necessarily appeal to all of the classic, vintage, older, Rare fan base. Those of us who have fallen in love with Sea of Thieves, generally, like, we see that through line between classic Rare and the modern day. And for me, it's this amazing co-op experience. I don't play Sea of Thieves alone. Like, for me, that wouldn't be fun, but for, like, the joy of Sea of Thieves is actually getting to be in this world of Rare with my friends from around the world and going on an adventure together. And, that's always been the strong pull and draw for me. But if you don't like co-op, if you like single player, then I guess it could be a little off-putting.
And I will say, like, I'm not the most active Sea of Thieves player. I don't play a lot. But, every now and then, on a rare occasion, I'll be like, you know what? It'd be fun just to crew up with some people I know, maybe the Idaho crew, maybe a couple people on staff, and just kind of sail and have a nice little time. Yeah. It doesn't have to be something I'm always invested in. But it's nice to have something that I can maybe every now and then look at and be like, I could go for a little pirate adventure right now.
Sure.
And I do want to say, though, I do enjoy what Snake Fighter said about, still pushing back against all the good people left. And you know what? Very right. Chris Marlowe, as far as we know, still there, still working at Rare, still having a great time working on these projects and being part of these creative teams. And he's also a man that if you meet, just such a genuinely very big, huggable teddy bear,
Yeah. I will say this too. We're talking about people at Rare who are known entities, who have some sort of public presence. There are so many people who work there who we never know. They don't put themselves out there. And, they're not really known by the fandom. And that was the case for so many people at Rare prior to the age of social media. It really is just like, there are so many talented people at Rare who were not there during the Nintendo years, who weren't even there during the aughts, during the Xbox 360 years, who have come along and contributed so much to the studio, brought so much creative energy to the studio, and continue the studio's legacy. And I don't think it's fair to have this arbitrary cutoff, like so many people do, of, all the good ones have to be there before the release of Star Fox Adventures or whatever,
Yeah, no, definitely. It's just difficult.
yeah. And
what more is there to say?
Yeah. And look, obviously, I'm the dumb optimist. I am the one who's always holding out for better things in the future. But I think that even with the justified pessimism concerning Xbox game studios and Microsoft as a whole, I do think Rare is going to be okay, at least for the time being. Nothing lasts forever. Granted, and we are in the throes, the madness of late-stage capitalism. And the CEOs of the world, and especially of this country, are just gobbling so much shit right now with glee. And so, who knows? Who knows how things are going to shake out as a whole for the Xbox brand, for the studios under their purview. But I remember how bleak and how pessimistic I felt after those May 2014 layoffs. I thought that was the end. I mean, we did a conversation about it, and I was basically like at wit's end, and I was just like, fuck Microsoft, Rare's dead, I can't believe they would lay off all of these talented people. And I'm not justifying that. That still fucking sucks that you can't see value in the likes of Chris Sutherland, you know? Like, really? Like, Steve Mails, Greg's brother, you know? Like, really? And we got great things out of it. We got Platonic out of that. And it kind of had a happy ending. Still doesn't make it right in my eyes, but I called it the original sin of the buyout, or the original sin of the Renaissance. I'm mixing up my errors now. But, you know, Rare was able to bounce back in very quick fashion. And it almost became like those layoffs and the utter defeat we were all feeling as fans. What was like a bad dream. They bounced back so fast and with such renewed energy and vigor. And I look at Joe Neate and Jim Horth and how they've taken over the studio. I mean, that's a relatively new development. And knowing that they have big plans, optimistic, ambitious plans. And, you know, I'm like, I have to at least have faith that they will steer their ship. Doesn't mean that they're not going to hit a big Microsoft iceberg along the way, but that's, you know, almost beyond what I can worry about. And that's a bigger problem. I think Rare is in good hands right now, and I have faith in the people still at Rare. Doesn't mean I'm not upset about these layoffs and about losing all the talented people. But even, you know, if the worst came to pass eventually, because like I said, nothing lasts forever. One day, Rare might not be around as an institution, as a current studio. That might come true one day, and we might have to cover it. But I said back on that May 2014 episode of The Kongversation that the spirit of these games, of these characters and these franchises, and specifically the fandom and sense of community that we're all a part of, that belongs to us. That is really the shared heritage that we all carry with us. And that we'll always make sure to keep that spirit alive. So at the end of the day, even if the doomsayers are right and Rare is shuttered because we have to make number go up on this spreadsheet, we are still going to keep everything Rare has done a vibrant part of the conversation, but conversation as well. You know, the great thing about what we do and our fandom is, yeah, it does suck that whenever something's going well for Donkey Kong, it feels like everything else is falling apart and vice versa. But that means we can carry the other thing on the back of the good stuff and keep talking about Banjo-Kazooie and Conker and Grab by the Ghoulies and Viva Pinata and It's Mr. Pants and Saberwolf and all of these properties and characters and games and the creators behind them. Greg Mails is no longer with Rare, and that feels so damn strange. But you better believe we are going to continue to celebrate what Greg Mails has given us, what Louise O'Connor has given us, what Will Overton, and everyone else at Rare who has been laid off, but we're not talking about because, you know, it's not necessarily public and we don't want to, you know, it's none of our business. But we're going to continue to celebrate everything they have given us, everything they have contributed to our fandom and the video game industry as a whole. And that's not nothing. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. How are you feeling, Adam?
You know, a little nauseous, maybe a bit gassy. Nothing that I can't work out. But in all sincerity, I do feel like more than ever, I don't know what the future of Xbox as a brand is and what that will entail and how it will or will not come out of this. But I do feel like, like I said earlier, as long as Xbox as a brand exists, I think Rare as an entity will exist. And as long as Rare exists, I think they will continue to evolve and find ways to thrive.
And if worse comes to worse, you know, I play my cards right. Maybe I'll have the income to buy Rare when it all goes tits up. You want to see bad management? Oh my God, you've seen nothing yet. Wait until I'm in charge. You're gonna miss Phil Spencer.
This has been a File 2 production.
Qué rico.